So in this video, we're going to go through how to structure your AWS organization based off the AWS well-architected framework, as well as the cloud adoption framework, otherwise known as AWS CAF, so that you can reduce your cloud bill and help you meet compliance standards a little easier. So I'm going to break down all the different organizational units you should use inside of your management account, as well as how to use AWS Control Tower, AWS Config, and Security Hub to implement this pattern across all of your accounts, and it'll take you only like 30 minutes to do so. And if you're wondering, who is this guy? Why should I listen to him? I'm currently working with an organization that is meeting ISO 27001, NIST 853, and working on SOC 2 compliance. And these are just some of the ways that we've structured our organization to help us meet these standards a little easier. So within your AWS organization, the first thing we're going to want to look at is how you're going to structure your management account. So inside of the organization, we have a management account, and this is usually like your root account. So this is where all of the really like core things go. So you're going to want to set up your AWS IAM Identity Center. Ideally, you're probably using Azure AD if you work at a decent to large size company. So this is where you would set up the SAML connection, or however you want to provide whatever your authentication provider is, connected into Identity Center, so that way your organization is tied directly from your identity provider into IAM, and you're not creating IAM users for each person, because that'll draw out some problems. Like if a user leaves the company, you want their access to be removed immediately rather than having to go find all of the IAM roles or accounts rather that they have. From there, we'll have a management account roles, and this we'll get into down here in a minute. All of the budgets, the billing, cost explorer, the usage reports, and the billing, these things will all be inside of here so that you have a high level to view what you're spending on your resources. Again, this is very much dependent on the other things that we'll get into here with the red through green boxes. But this is just your high level. You really want to implement tagging across your resources so that you can track better from this management account. Like you'll already see what account you're spending in, but within that account, what's the project related to, who spun it up, how long's it been running, is there a billing code for that if you need it? Like all of those sorts of things you want to send back to this management account. Then your AWS organizations will be inside of here. That's where we're actually managing all of the other accounts, which this is the organization here. AWS Cloud Trail, so if we're logging anything, we want to have them structured here. And then the other thing I really want to touch on here is AWS Config. So when we're using Control Tower, you can set up config to enforce certain requirements across your entire organization. And that is really the benefit of using Control Tower and config. If you're on Azure, this would be Azure policy if you're familiar with that. So say you need to meet let's say you have to meet a standard and your S3 buckets can't be public. That's very common for basically any standard you're going to meet. We can put in a policy here, or a config in this case, that is going to say every S3 bucket should not be public. And then it'll come back. You can scan it either continuously, like as soon as that's created or changed, it'll tell you, or you can do something daily where it'll tell you on a daily basis, it'll scan and say, hey, these resources are not in sync with your policies. And then we can set what's known as SCPs, or service control policies, to enforce other rules across these accounts. So that's one of them. We could say you can't create an AWS resource unless it has certain tagging standards. So it's going to need name of the resource. It's going to need a project code. It's going to need an application owner. It's going to need created on date. That, whatever you need to implement, which tagging something I'll talk about here as we move on again. Really important in AWS especially. It's really the best way to track things, but I'll get into that. Amazon CloudWatch, so not really much to speak on here. You're probably familiar with it. But again, organizational policies, so you can see those policies, how they're being run back through CloudWatch here. So let's move on now to the red box. And so this is going to be our infrastructure for our, think about it like our enterprise infrastructure. So like this is where you're going to set up your GitLab or your GitHub instance if you're running enterprise and it's an on-premise experience. If you have a VPN and you want to connect into that, you're going to configure that here, and then you can peer the networks to the other accounts that we'll get into. If you're running Terraform Enterprise, for example, that would be set up in here, and again, have access across them. If you're running HashiCorp Vault, so anything that is like not specific to a project, it's really about like the inside IT supporting the enterprise. That's going to go in your infrastructure OU. primarily going to be networking for most people until you get to the scale that you're building out. Little side note on what I just said about the scale. If you're already at this scale that you have all of these things, but you don't organize your accounts like this, you can do so. You can go into Control Tower and set up this type of organization, and it's just like a folder structure. I'll leave some docs on how to do this. So you can literally just drop in to each of the organization structures what accounts should go in there. So there might be some cleanup that needs to go into that if you haven't been doing it this way, but this is the way that AWS recommends based on their well architected, and it's really going to help you scale. So if you already have like 10 AWS accounts and it's just all under your root and there's no like organization, then I would recommend looking into this and see, kind of follow this video and you'll see what it looks like. And then you can go implement it for yourself, even if you've already built out accounts. So this isn't just for greenfield projects. The other infrastructure OU account that we're going to want is our backup account. So you can store all of your backups inside of a centrally managed account here. And then lastly, the identity account. So this is what's diagrammed out here. We can actually manage our identity through here because we don't want people accessing the management account. So we configure things within the management account to connect into here, but then this is where really most of the things should be done. So get off of your root credentials as quick as you can and start using these. Next up, we're going to go ahead and get into the security OU. So this is where we're going to have two accounts primarily. You'll set up your security tooling account and your log archive account. So first, with the security tooling or the audit account, this is where you're going to have most of your tooling, such as Security Hub, Guard Duty, Amazon Macie. I'm actually not familiar with that. I'll have to read about that. Your firewall manager, detector. So the kind of things that your IT security team are going to be looking into, that should all be in here. And this is for a centrally managed account for when you get audited, as well as preparing for audit. So you want everything funneling to this account that is relevant to those things. And that way you can see exactly when things are out of compliance or anything that detects as far as attacks. All of those sorts of things go into this one account. And so you can organize it with your IT sec there. Then the other one's the log archive account. So as it sounds, it's a central store for all of your logging. If you're meeting some of these compliance standards, you probably have some kind of requirement for how long you have to store the data. So a lot of them are like 7 years you have to store data. You can keep all of the logs to know at a certain point if you need to reference it in the future, you can come back to it and know that it exists there. And that way, it's usually just some cheap S3 buckets. You can set up Security Lake if you're at that scale. I'll be honest, I haven't done that before. But that's another way you can do it if you're really at large scale watching this. Okay, now that you have all those things set up, you can actually get into building out some infrastructure for your application. And that will be done in these accounts. So we're going to have an exceptions OU, a workload OU, and a sandbox OU. And so inside of your sandbox OU, you might have your dev environments where people have the flexibility to build. You also might have individual accounts. So as you see here, you can build out a sandbox for every user that you need one. This would really be like they can build whatever they want within a certain budget and you're not really worried about it. Make sure this stuff is not peered into your network or have anything, like make sure it's fully isolated so that they have the ability to go do what they need to learn and test things out, but you're not putting yourself at risk in that sense. And inside of your workloads OU, you can have a breakdown like this where you have prod and test. You can name test whatever you want. If you want UAT, whatever it might be. And this is where we're going to build things within our dev or wherever it sits to start. We'll put it into test when we're really ready to build this thing like full-fledged production grade instance. And then once we've done that, we will promote it up to our prod environment. And then lastly, the exceptions OU. A lot of companies, ideally, you don't have this, but eventually you're probably going to have some exceptions, and that's exactly what they're for. So say you just bought out a new company and you have to import all of their AWS accounts. You might just throw them in your exceptions OU while you figure out what to do with them and figure out what's in compliance with your current stuff and not. Anything that is not up to standard, maybe it's not worth migrating to like any new policies the organization has put in place, that's what would go in here.